Hello, everybody. We are going to give it a minute to get some people in the room here. Hello. Looking forward to chatting with you guys today. It is a 10-year anniversary of me getting arrested and my life changing. So I'm going to speak on that. So we'll give it a few more minutes. Listen to some tunes real quick. Hello. Just bear with me, guys. I'm going to get a recording going on my computer here. Okay. All right. So yes, please do ask any questions that you may have for me while I'm speaking on this topic in the comments. I will be checking those out. Let me just pull that up here. Hope everybody's having a great day and feeling good. I know a number of my friends have gotten news that they are dealing with having the virus, and it's something that it seems like all of them are working through, and got a lot of prayers for them right now. All right. Yes. So, hi guys. I am Ranch Richard Guerra, as some know me as both. So thanks for joining me today and listening to me discuss some thoughts and feelings around my 10-year anniversary of the one arrest that I've had in my life, which led a year later to my incarceration at South Bay Correctional Facility here in Boston, Massachusetts, where I was a student at the time. Part of my intention in getting this live conversation going is to maybe help you and others process some of the feelings of isolation and the lack of control that a lot of us are experiencing right now. So again, I do want to acknowledge that I'm feeling isolated. I'm feeling like there's a lot of things that are not in my control. It is reminding me of what it felt like to be locked up all those years ago. And I know that so many are maybe feeling that for the first time in such a big way. So, I know that a lot of us are feeling a little locked up, stuck, lonely, separated from our loved ones and away from our purpose, our jobs, our passions. I do want you to remember that this will pass, that there is much to learn during a period like this as well for each of us, as there was for me while I was incarcerated. I am also hoping to have you guys ask some questions along the way, and I can check in here on my computer for those questions and answer them if you have them, and kind of get a conversation going. I am going to wing some of this. I got some stuff written up, but it feels good to be here with you guys. It's been a long road. I've felt a lot of things about it. I've been very nervous to talk about it for most of my life, either just with friends or definitely in a public forum like this. But I have time and time again seen that it does serve a purpose and it can be powerful. So I'm hoping that we can collectively make a difference, and maybe I can help as well. So do ask me any questions come to mind. So I was planning on throwing a gathering or a party to bring a lot of people together who were supporting me in that time. But obviously that idea was lost over the past few weeks. And this is a way that I can in some ways celebrate life since that time, and to bring attention to some of what people incarcerated today are going through and facing. And in other ways to give thanks to the angels, as my dad called them, the people that were there for me during that time. My dad being the one who sacrificed and fought and supported me nonstop with everything he had in him. So love you, Dad, of course, and my mother and my brother and the rest of my family as well. So these angels that I mentioned are my family, my friends, members of the live music community who were a part of my life before this and during. We had a Ranch Sauce Facebook group that was put together where folks in my life communicated about supporting me inside of jail and outside of jail while I was locked up. It was pretty amazing. I have shared that information with others over time. So if you do know people that are facing incarceration and looking like they're going to be locked up, a great idea is to put together a Facebook group somewhere online that all the people that want to support them can communicate about letters maybe getting returned, or, you know, does this person have this book yet? And how can they, you know, send them some money, something like that. Also the lostandsound.org and Use Your Head crew was my family that was around me at the time, and they started a Rage for Ranch movement out at music festivals and live events, which was really awesome to hear about. And it just felt good to know that the community and the people maybe I was partying with or that I was friends with were out there supporting me. And yeah, thanks everybody for the fundraisers that were put together and the countless books and magazines and letters that were provided to me by my friends. And it just made that experience so much more bearable. And right now, as one of my best friends who was arrested that day with me said to me today on the phone, we need to work to have our gratitude at least match our fear. And I think that is really pertinent for all of us today. The more that we stay in contact with our friends and family and provide support, the less space that our fear will have to exist. And I think that is definitely the case while incarcerated, but can also maybe apply to us today. So I'm gonna dive into my story a little bit. I saw a question there, someone asking, you know, how long I served. The answer to that is 20 months. And let's see, I thought I saw some other comments. Let me just double check and make sure I'm not missing any questions here. Doesn't look like it. Okay. So yeah, a little bit about my life growing up. I grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and, you know, spent a lot of time around the arts and was really focused on my education at a young age, you know, kind of had that gifted, talented kind of gifted status that they gave kids back then. And, you know, felt really focused on going to college and getting that whole thing going, and was just all about educating myself and being, you know, in sports and in different type of extracurriculars. And I did have a pretty serious injury in football that was like a dislocated hip. And I do remember kind of the period after that leading me to, you know, maybe drinking a lot and going out as a high school student and doing, you know, experimenting with drugs and things like that. All very dangerous at times and ignorant, you know, whether it was with pills and alcohol or other things. And that was, you know, something that I know I was unprepared to experience in my family. And I don't think any of us were ready to really understand what that was going to mean for me down the road. But, you know, that kind of all came on after I was already set up to go to school. So I applied for a bunch of universities on the East Coast. I was feeling pretty drawn to New York City and applied to a bunch of schools there. Eventually kind of just accidentally applied to school in Boston, at Boston University. It's a city I'd never been to. You know, I was 18 years old and got into school there, and they covered the cost of a lot of that education. So it made sense for me to push for that with my family, who, you know, fairly lower middle class, like never really paid for this kind of thing before. And, you know, my dad and my mother and my family really just took on that work to work harder and to have extra money to pay for me to go to school. So yeah, I ended up moving out here to Boston and was 18, no family here, just kind of dove into classes, living in Kenmore Square in the middle of a big city, you know, no experience in any of that, being on my own, and was just surrounded by people from all over the world, students from all over the world, you know, hanging out with, partying with folks that were much older, many of which had a lot more resources in terms of maybe money or whatever it was. And it just seemed to be, I quickly kind of got caught up in smoking a lot and drinking a lot and sororities and, fraternity life, that kind of thing, and hanging out at those kind of parties. And prior to that, in high school, I had developed a little bit of a habit and an issue that I didn't really know was serious with cocaine use and alcohol abuse. And, we know now that those two combined really is a kind of a rough combo, as well as just kind of cannabis early on in high school and in college being the kind of thing that I didn't have any education about, and it was just about partying, and I was just abusing the hell out of that. And psychedelics as well at BU as a freshman, and when I was kind of just getting going and going to parties, it was a world I'd never seen before, and I didn't have anyone looking out for me really. I just kind of had I'm just staying in the dorms, going to classes, talking to my parents on the phone, telling them, yeah, sure, I'm working catering or I'm working at the dining hall for a little bit of extra cash. But, quickly it became this thing, about money and needing money because my family could pay for school, but they couldn't really pay for other things I wanted to spend money on or trips I wanted to take to New York City or something like that. And quickly I was like, dormitories are not going to fly. I need to be able to have my own apartment like my buddies have that are, their families are paying for this extra expense in Boston, which the rent is through the roof. And, so it kind of, that feeling that urge to like be on their level and to like be focusing a little more on partying and socializing and going to music and just exploring psychedelics more so than going to class. Although, going to class was an amazing thing as well. I was really passionate about journalism and politics and U.S. history, and I was studying a lot of that combined with religion and spirituality as my minor, which led me to a lot of Eastern studies, meditation, yoga, things like that. So, there was a lot of, I was spending a lot of time outside of class while I wasn't really working, and maybe I was starting to sell weed and sell drugs to make money, putting into practice like the things I was learning in school and my spiritual life, and writing a lot of poems and essays, and kind of just looking to be a gonzo writer in the same vein as Hunter S. Thompson, and maybe a beat poet in the same vein as Jack Kerouac. And, I just was throwing my whole life into that, and it felt great, as well as electronic music festivals became a big draw for me, and I became a big part of that community, and I started to innovate there with friends. So I was pretty much not compelled to work the hours that I needed to on top of going to school to have access to the things that I wanted, whether that was an apartment in Brookline with my buddies, or, the ability to travel to Camp Bisco Festival or whatever it was. And I was desperate for that money. And I also personally needed access to as much cannabis as possible and other party substances. And, I didn't have the money for that. I didn't have money for rent. So it was just very quickly kind of utilizing my ability to connect with friends and people to find my way to essentially selling cannabis and cocaine and ecstasy and other types of drugs to my community. I wasn't really out there just hustling in the streets. It was more of like my friends need this, I can provide this for my friends, and a lot of justification for the criminal activity, and ultimately putting myself in a position to really change my life and my family's lives. I do remember thinking, oh, well, if I get busted or if something, happens to me, then, I'll probably just get a slap on the wrist and I'll have to get cleaned up and, it'll be fine. And, it never really felt all that real. I had never experienced being arrested. I had never really, the people around me had never experienced that. We were all, pretty privileged kids from pretty well-to-do backgrounds. Many of my friends were, and it was just, didn't really feel all that real. And I know that a lot of younger people today may feel that way, that, hustling for money while being able to realize that they are abusing substances and a lifestyle. And many of them may be deep into addictions as well. And that is definitely something that I observe a lot of people going through. And it's it can be hard to have a place to talk to someone about that, whether it's, most of those people probably have no access to a therapist. They feel ashamed in communicating to their family like I did. I was really spending all that time on the other side of the country from my family, telling them, oh, school's going great, and I'm fine, and everything's good, and yeah, I've got money, but it was a lot of lies, and that built up internally like a sense of, not such a great sense of self-worth, and just felt rough to have that dishonesty going on with them and with myself. And all the while, my abuse of these substances was really ramping up. I was also feeling pretty good. I had started Lost in Sound with some friends, which was a electronic music blog, festival blog, where we were, doing media and interviews, and I was learning a lot about doing journalism for live music, and it felt good. So I kind of felt like I was an entrepreneur, and I was starting some stuff on the side, and I was finishing school, and I had like a little side job, and it just felt okay. I thought I would be fine, and so then let's see, February, 10 years ago. 10 years ago is in a month. In February, before graduation, which would have been May of 2010. February, I had a really rough winter. I had been sick. I think I was living in an apartment with like mold. I don't really know, but I went to go see a doctor. My grandparents paid for that, and I found out that I had a really bad deviated septum. And in that moment, it was really scary for me. I was like, okay, I don't think I should be snorting, drugs. I had been snorting pills and coke and whatever since high school. It was just a habit that I had that was difficult to break. And I got that information, and it was just really scary for me. So I do remember thinking, okay, I got to start separating myself from having all of these drugs around me, from, doing all these drugs, from really this lifestyle. I needed a break. I was feeling very ready for it all to be finished. But I was pretty wrapped up in it. I won't go into details, but I definitely felt like I was owing money to people that I worked for and worked with, and was just unsure about what I was going to do. My plan was to get the hell out of Massachusetts once I graduated and escape. But we had, in my house, which was essentially kind of a music festival in a house in Allston, 20 Pratt Street, a bunch of students, DJ booth, live music venue in the basement. We would throw parties for days and really just bring a community together, but at the same time act pretty irrational about substances and do some illegal activity. So that was an amazing time for us in a lot of ways. But we had a young kid that came into the house that was communicating with some roommates of mine about a different substance, particularly opiates, something I had never done, something I'd never sold. And that was kind of going on behind the scenes. I didn't really know much about that and happening. But that kid who was about our age, I guess college age or whatever, he was an informant, which I have learned a lot about since, for the drug police in the area. And that guy was very, he was high on drugs with roommates. We had no idea he was working for the police, and he was coming into our house in and out and essentially informing for, I think, over a month, and maybe even brought some undercovers into it. And all the while, I'm just thinking, I got a few months left. I'm going to graduate, and I'm going to get the hell out of this. And then one day, 10 years ago, about this time of night, about 6 o'clock, I think, my roommate and I were planning on going to see an Emancipator show and a Keller Williams show in one night. Super excited. Music was really just all that we focused on and cared about, live music. And we went to get the sandwiches at the door, and it was like the guy that normally delivers sandwiches, and then a bunch of police just rushed into the front door and the back door and kicked down the doors and just, had me on the ground. And it was a pretty crazy feeling. And that's where the trauma, I think, really began for me through this period. But it was a moment of relief, though. At the same time, I did not want to keep that life up, and I didn't want to have that lifestyle, and I didn't want to feel that way about myself anymore, and I needed something to give. And so it was kind of relieving. I suppose they ended up, taking us in, myself and my other roommate who was a student that got arrested with me. And we spent the night in the local jail, and all of our friends went to the show, and they raised a bunch of money. My father and my brother put money in, and, they were able to bail me out. Pretty sizable amount that night. And yeah, like from that moment for the next year, I was on bail. I had been suspended from Boston University from my school a few months ahead of my graduation, which was, soul shaking and breaking, of course, for myself and my family. The school was able to support me. I was close with them, and they were like, we'll be here for you when you make it out of this. And so yeah, that year on bail was really rough on my community, on that household. We all got kind of evicted and scattered. I didn't see a lot of those close friends of mine again in some respects, in some cases, and not for years in others. And I spent that time on bail just really scared and unsure of what was going on. I was kind of feeling like I was paranoid. I felt like I was being watched. The detectives really wanted me to roll and rat on someone while they had me locked up the first night and really throughout that whole period. And that was just the story of the whole year was, while my lawyer and I were going into all these different courtrooms and having all these discussions, it was always about like, can they get me to provide information? And that didn't feel like the right thing for me to do. And at the same time, it felt pretty dangerous in a lot of ways for me to be doing that in the context of my friend who I was working with, but also the people that he owed money to for the drugs that they confiscated, which were, pretty large amount of that. So in the context of what drugs I had, we lived in this big house, and like in my room, we had this safe, and like we just decided to put all the stuff in there. And then each of our friends that would kind of distribute things amongst our groups would kind of come to me, and we would just kind of work out of that. And so, let's see, I had cannabis, psilocybin, a lot of cocaine. Cocaine really is the reason why this one arrest being my first offense, a nonviolent charge in this country, really can throw your life for a loop in a big way and really throw things off and mess them all up. So, didn't really think much about that beforehand, but I, have not touched and not, snorted a drug, not, put cocaine in my nose, that kind of thing since that arrest 10 years ago. And that has been a pretty easy decision to stick with. So yeah, I was on bail for a year. During that time, I saw a substance abuse counselor, which was really kind of the first step in getting in recovery for me, was to start to learn about how the brain worked in relation to these different drugs and maybe what my drug of choice was and things like that. And to kind of just start having conversations with the therapist about my life with substances up to that point, and just to start taking in the science, which I think was really big for me to keep me away from those drugs and to get in recovery. Additionally, I kind of just, there's not a whole lot to report during that period other than just being kind of afraid and like feeling like my friends and my family were very possibly, going to be separated from me. I started to do a lot of reading for Ram Dass is where I kind of developed that relationship, and his book, Be Loved Now, really helped me get prepared to go to jail, in the sense that I was able to kind of start to connect with people and others and strangers and, people suffering on like a level that I had not before, which, I knew that I wanted to have the easiest time while incarcerated and not have conflict if possible. So that was huge for me. And I do think that people thinking about, being in that position need to, or think they may be incarcerated, should turn to that kind of thing to build up their spiritual practice. So then what happened is I ended up in this situation like many people where they were really pushing a plea deal to me. And so even though there were a lot of things that the police probably did that maybe weren't all that okay, and maybe I could have gotten around these charges, they were really pushing for me to not go to trial. I actually, to go back a little bit, when I was arrested, they sat me down in my kitchen and kind of did the good cop, bad cop thing with me, in the sense that, I was just speaking out of my mouth, like just everything that I was feeling, which was, that I was very relieved and I was like so glad to have this thing over with. And like, I just was ready to like almost tell somebody. It was like they were like, my therapist was in the kitchen with me, but it was really a police officer. And so I spilt all the goods. I essentially was like, this is all my stuff. Like, it's mine. I just gave them all that to go on. And so in that way, there wasn't really a case. So, my family and I, we hired a lawyer, 10 grand, and then we had to pay like another 10 grand over time because, apparently I was facing federal charges, for the amount of drugs that I had. So it was just like that much more expensive, which was very difficult again on my family to handle. Couldn't really afford that, but, so we ended up, taking that plea. And the only options I had were like what they call 3 in a day. So I was looking at 3 years, no breaks, 3 years time. That was one of the offers, because the amount of substances that I was working on or that I had, I was facing a number of possession charges, a number of distribution charges, a bunch of school zones, which essentially in this city and like many cities, they can just call the whole city a school zone and just tack on more charges and just give you more time and just kind of, ultimately, like all these drug charges they're just tacking them on. They just want you to see that even though it's your first time and you're a nonviolent drug offender, you had so much cocaine that like you're facing 8 years is what essentially they were kind of trying to put in my face. And it was very scary for sure to be hearing that for myself and my family and my friends. And none of us had any idea. We had never faced that before. And so, I ended up not wanting to be going to trial because it was like, whoa, if I, am guilty in trial, then I could get 8 years is essentially what they were scaring me, how I was being scared. And then I ended up pleading out to 3 years soft with 3 years probation. So that was what I got for, let's see, it was like, I guess I was convicted on for 6 months for, I believe, a pound of psilocybin. And then I plead out to 2.5 years for the 2 ounces of cocaine that I had. Now, that was the real issue, is normally, it would be much less than that. But at the time, for some reason, there was just a lot of talk that led to me having a lot more of that than I would have normally had on me. And that amount really made a huge difference in this being a serious thing for me. And that could happen to anyone that is wrapped up in that type of dealing and working with cocaine or maybe other serious drugs. In this world today, still with these laws, it is very dangerous, no matter if you have a record or not. If you have a record, even more dangerous. I mean, just a bad way, just not something anyone should be doing. If you know someone doing it, I would highly recommend that you have conversations with them about the severity of what they're facing. So I ended up leaving a year after, 9 years ago today, for South Bay. All my friends in the courtroom there. It was a very emotional thing. But luckily for me, I had done that work for a year to get ready to think about what I'd done and my relation with substances and just kind of done that work to be somebody that I think could get through it with some success, I guess. So I did set the intention to go into being incarcerated and to come out the other side of that as fast as possible and as unscathed, I guess, as I could. It was, as far as what it was like for me in there, It was definitely it was. So I didn't go to prison. I did take a deal where I would not go upstate to a prison facility, but instead was stayed here in Boston at the county jail for an extended period of time, which is like up sometimes a good thing, sometimes not so good. Mostly it was so that my family in Texas could come and visit me, and my friends could come visit me, and I was blessed enough to have pretty frequent visits. Although that's not the easiest thing to get set up, and not the easiest thing to actually have go down. And yeah, it was just it was an interesting time. You know, when people ask me about it, when I talk about it, it does feel like it was for me kind of a like a sabbatical, like in the sense that like I did all my studies like so much more than I would have without being isolated like that, and I took care of my health on a whole nother level than I had ever done. Yeah, it was just, and I ended up connecting through letters and these phone calls and these, you know, these very infrequent meetings with the people that I cared the most about on a whole nother level. So, you know, I think some of us can maybe even relate to that now, in that, you know, yeah, we can't physically be with the people we care about, but we're, you know, writing letters, we're communicating over online, we're doing these video chats, and, you know, I think we're going to see a deeper connection being built with a lot of people. So, let's see. As far as what I kind of got done, what I did while I was incarcerated in there, you know, it kind of started out with reading front to back all the books that my friends sent me, reading front to back all the magazine subscriptions that my friends sent me. I mean, I'd get magazines multiple times a week, and I just read them front to back. And then just so many letters. I was so blessed to have so many letters. And like, if you do know someone incarcerated, like it is difficult to like go and sit down and write a letter and type it up and print it out and figure out how to get it to them. But like, it you know, makes such a huge difference in their lives. I was surrounded by so many people, so many men, you know, going through so much trauma, maybe a lifetime of trauma. And they just, the connection to someone else and somebody they care about was either really strained. Maybe they'd be screaming on the phone at their wife or their kid or something, or they just wouldn't hear from them. And that is, it just adds to that trauma. So I would encourage people to reach out if you do know someone that is incarcerated. But I was able to just write letters back to every letter that I got. And it was really just a never ending thing. I mean, it was like 20 months was how long I was in there. And it was just like 20 months of just writing letters back to people mostly. And just, I always had this routine that just was developing over time. It was always like, you know, listening to NPR and like different types of radio channels, radio shows, and keeping notes about music and things like that. And reading all these books and taking notes while I was reading these books and these magazines, and learning. And as I was learning things, bringing that to the communication to my friends and showing them what I was learning, and writing poems. I had always had that to turn to when I was younger, and luckily I had that to turn to while I was incarcerated. I wrote about 70 poems, which would be great to put out in a book someday. And I also wrote a journal that just went on and on and on, and I have tons of pages of written journal that I have yet to type up, but I did a little Gonzo account and wrote essentially a book about my experience throughout that, and what I had learned. And you know, I'm sure I get a question a lot if I was in a fight or anything like that, or if I had like conflicts, and luckily I was from Texas, and I was in this Boston jail, and like all these people in jail with me were from these different neighborhoods. Maybe they'd been in and out. They like knew each other. There was conflict between neighborhoods and different types of people. And I was able to kind of just, you know, move through that and like around that, in the sense that like people just called me Tex or Texas. And I was just able to do my work, which was to just be friends with anyone I could, and to like meet everyone I could with understanding and compassion, and ask questions, and, you know, and just not be afraid, but also not be, you know, not be so dumb that I just felt like I was just gonna like, you know, get too close to people. You know, I'm half Hispanic, so it was like, am I sort of interested in hanging out with like the Hispanic clique in this jail, but it wasn't really for me because I didn't really speak Spanish. And, you know, and then, so, you know, but at the same time, like a lot of the like more like Caucasian group in this Boston jail was kind of like focused on things I wasn't really into. And either way, I didn't want to be a part of any of that because there was always so much that you were owed. You owed someone or you owed the group, and maybe that you could get convinced to do something for the group you were a part of that would get you in trouble, that could get you more time or and that kind of thing. So, throughout that period, I never had one fight, never had an altercation with anyone physically, and I never was like lugged or taken to the hole or like gotten in trouble or anything like that. I just really had a pretty set intention to reach the goal of getting out of there as soon as possible, and to be as like healthy and safe throughout that, and it was pretty successful. So when I look back on it, it was like, I feel like it was one of the major accomplishments in my life. I'm going to take a little break here and look at some questions. So Rob, who was a big part of that time for me, he asked, did you come across substances while locked up, and did you struggle with any temptations? So it was a weird thing. I mean, there was, the occasional like cigarette kind of thing, and I never had a cigarette. I never smoked that, so that was easy to stay away from. And some people would make like alcohol, like with fruit and things like that, and I had no interest in that. It seemed gross, and I felt pretty good about not drinking pretty quickly. I had never really stayed away from drinking since I started when I was 15. I was 22 when I got in there, and so it was like, it just felt counterproductive. So yeah, I didn't do that. There was a lot of like people like that were getting prescribed different types of pills, that would like fake swallow them and then like essentially sell them back and like try to, sell those to people. Again, I wasn't really about that, and I never touched that either. So, I do not think that I did not touch a substance while incarcerated. So during that 21 period, that was really a nice jumpstart to being sober and to being in recovery. I, was forced into it, but it was, really awesome and beneficial, and I felt great to be released from all that. In that same vein, I studied substance abuse counseling while incarcerated. So luckily this jail was in Boston. They had Harvard, BU students coming in there to teach classes. I signed up for every class I could. Some of it was philosophy, some of it was economics, finance, that kind of thing. I took all those classes in rooms full of some people who had no interest in them, that were maybe just convicts. But one awesome thing I got to do was actually take a course for credit that was taught by someone from UMass, University of Massachusetts, that was about substance abuse and substance abuse counseling. And I read this huge book from front to back, all about every type of drug, the history of them, and wrote some awesome essays, got those credits. Definitely was thinking about going and becoming a substance abuse counselor. Throughout my life, I've put that information into practice and done what I can to help myself and others to at least be educated about how substances work. And it just became pretty quickly became this thing for me where I realized, like, I was learning that like 3 months off of a substance, to have that many days away from something that you have a dependency on really is like necessary, and like a big way to kind of release yourself from that dependency is to have that time off. And I felt that I really didn't miss those things. I didn't really feel tempted because I had so many months and weeks away from them. I got a few more questions here. So, did I make any close friends, and am I still in contact with people that I may have gotten close to? There was a handful of people that really were there with me from start to finish. Most of them were my age. Some of them were in my Dungeons and Dragons class that we did at the library. Some of them were, just kind of nerdier guys, like with degrees that maybe also shouldn't have been there for like white collar crime or something like that. They tended to be the ones that were easier for me to really connect with, and not really in touch with many of them anymore. I've got a couple of buddies that have also been great, no issues, stayed out. We kind of support each other in there, and they're doing well now. One of which he was addicted to meth and like all that kind of thing on the streets before he went in, and while we were in there, we actually lived together briefly, and like I think had a nice impact and shared a lot of this information with each other. And he went out and became a substance abuse counselor, went to that program, got his certification, and has been helping people in halfway houses and all that. He's just done amazing things. So yeah, that was cool. Let's see, I got some more questions. Let me scroll back here real quick. Thanks for listening, guys. Give me just a second. All right. So my brother has asked a question. Hi, Trent. What's up? Thanks for everything, buddy. So like what my main takeaway from the experience was, it's hard to pick one. I would probably say that, let me think, you can kind of look back on moments where you hit a bottom and you fall and you think you go backwards in a big way and all of that. And you can always get back up, you can always kind of put that intention to move forward through that, to learn from it, to keep going. We have that luxury and that opportunity in this life, and I had that opportunity, and it feels good to keep that going and maybe to not make the same mistakes again. So that was pretty important for me, and I do think it feels good to be able to look back on a mistake and also know that I have not made that mistake again. I'm gonna switch back to out of the questions for a minute. So lots of meditation also in there. I had a lot of time to sit in a small room isolated by myself sometimes, or with somebody that maybe didn't speak English. I'd be in there with like guys that that were from other countries sometimes. That was pretty crazy because I have a Hispanic last name, so they'd put me in sales with Hispanic guys that were from other countries, and it'd be weird to just not be able to communicate. So I'd spend a lot of time meditating. I'd go to different types of classes for meditation, maybe a poetry class, a yoga class. They did offer those kind of things, and I was able to take advantage of that. I worked in the library where they had all kinds of books, all kinds of magazines. They would download music for me if I wanted to hear an album, and I could listen to that. We'd get to watch some movies that were new. I mean, there were some things about it that were okay. We had televisions in each of the cells that were flat screen, probably like 15 channels. I would just watch CNN pretty much all the time, or I'd get to watch movies and shows and things like that. So great. Also kind of twisted. It's like people get kind of comfortable living that life. There were a lot of people with the recidivism that are able to just kind of go in and out of that experience whenever they want, knowing that they would get fed and all of that. I could go on. There's so much to say about what it was like in there. I just kind of want to make sure I'm not missing anything super important. Just taking really good care of myself, like thinking about what I'm eating started in there. I was able to not eat all the horrible junk stuff because I didn't want to get really sick or out of shape. So I tried to eat kind of as best I could, and stay really active, which was really good I could tell in periods where I was inactive that I'd be much more prone to depression and being sad. Whereas in periods where I was really moving around, running, playing basketball, working out and stuff, it was not so bad. So there's a lot that I can say about that, but I'll kind of just finish up the story a little bit, I think, right now. And so 18 months is when I was supposed to be getting out. That was halfway through my sentence. It didn't really happen until 20 months that I was able to be released. And those last few months were pretty crazy. It was you're really hoping you're going to be out at this time, but it turns out the isolation is, and that period you were hoping would be finished is actually not, and you gotta stick around for longer, and every day is excruciating. The last point there is I did, in order to be released, I did have to do a drug program. So they had a whole unit with a bunch of guys that we all had to go to AA and NA meetings together, which was pretty impactful as well. If you want to kind of get away from drugs and alcohol and rethink your addictions, and maybe go to some AA and NA meetings full of guys that are deep in it, have spent a lifetime in it, or maybe dying from their addictions. That was what I was around, and taking notes and just trying to learn as best I could. And it was pretty impactful as well. So yeah, I got out, got on parole. And they had me on parole and probation at the same time, which is pretty fucked up. Like I had to go. I didn't have a car in Boston. I never did. But now here I am. I'm a felon. I'm on parole. I'm on probation. I'm living in. I think I was living in Somerville when I first got out with Allie Ward and Noreen Ward, who I lived with Allie for 3 years. They really set me up and saved my ass in a lot of ways right away when I got out. And then that experience around them was really beautiful for me to have them in my life. But I'm living in Somerville, and I have to on the train to Quincy, like on the other side of the city, to go see like my parole officer, give them some money monthly, even though I didn't really even know where I was going to make any, to another office near my house in the Middlesex County to pay my parole officer and check in with both of them. And one of the craziest parts of this whole experience for me, that was like really the most terrifying part, it wasn't thinking about going to jail. It wasn't really anything that happened in jail. It was, I'm out of jail, and how do I stay out of jail is like really what is crazy. And I saw lots of people come in and go back in, or go out and come back in, and it just seems so easy to do. And right away they were like, okay, go here and do a drug test. It's like, I've been incarcerated for 20 months. Like, I'm not doing any drugs. I haven't done drugs in that period of time, but I got to go start doing drug tests. And I've never even done one in my life, like to go pee, and then they check, for drugs, that kind of thing. And I went in there, and it was very not fun, like pretty oppressive scene. And, I had to go in a bathroom with mirrors all over it, and, a cop just essentially looking at me to make sure I'm not like going to try to lie about the pee results or something like that. And I just couldn't go. Like, I had never done that before. I couldn't go pee. I tried. They were like, well, we're sick of this. You need to leave. I get a call from my probation officer, and they're like, well, you are going back in there tomorrow, and you're getting it done, or we're sending you back, and you're going to finish the rest of your sentence. And this is like, I just get out. I'm having phone calls with my parents and my friends. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is great. Like, I'm, back or whatever. I'm back on the scene. And then that same night, I'm like, oh God, I may have to go back. Sorry, guys. And, I was able to drink a shit ton of Dunkin' Donuts coffees, and just like, just went back in there, was terrified, like shaking pretty much. And I was able to get that done. It was very difficult. And then, I kind of used that same tactic of like, don't let the fear overcome or take me over. I'm going to go take a piss. It was just crazy how that was like really difficult to do, but it was like not life or death, but it was like life or incarceration for me. And I got the swing of that. So I was on parole for a year while on probation for a year. I was in touch with Boston University over letters while I was incarcerated. They let me come back, and they gave me the full scholarship grant amount that I had originally had to come back and finish this final semester, which was huge. Can't even say enough about it. So while on probation and parole, I went back to school at BU. I took 5 classes in one semester. And whereas I was a B and like a C student before, I was able to, in my clarity and sobriety and just focus on my life. I was able to enroll in a bunch of classes, in 5 classes that felt like things that I wanted to, like the classes felt like they applied to what I wanted to do with my life. Whereas like early on when I was a college student, I didn't really know necessarily. So I was kind of just picking things willy-nilly. This was like, each of these things may help me in my career kind of. And I got straight A's in that final semester and was able to graduate. And it was just like a really, amazing turning point for me. And like, that's the kind of like awesome thing that so many people on parole and probation that are trying to figure their life out do not have access to something so extremely kind of empowering and successful. So I was blessed in that way. So I get off parole, and now I'm on probation for like another year. And I got a job at a restaurant. So I have, these felony charges. I was able to get a job at a restaurant where I don't believe they did any sort of background check. And I just stuck with that job for 3 years of being out of jail, so that, and I was, bartending, running food, learning to do serving. It was pretty good money, and I got to eat for free, and, nobody at my job ever asked me any questions about it. I never was really didn't have to talk to anybody. I really was keeping that stuff internalized. I would hunch over a lot. I just felt a lot of negativity about myself, the trauma and like the anxiety and the depression. I essentially had PTSD from that experience that I just described and didn't know it. And that was affecting me physically. I had a lot of inflammation in my sternum from kind of hunching over. And that was scary too. And I also ended up, I had Mass Health. So they did give me free health care as soon as I got out of jail. And I kept free health care for years in Massachusetts, no problem, everything free. During that period, I went and saw another nose doctor. I got a free, didn't have to pay anything to get my nose, get some surgery done to fix my my deviated septum, which was awesome. And I've been able to breathe amazing ever since. I would suggest looking into the deviated septum surgery for somebody who has got inability to breathe out of one nostril. It's pretty fucked up part of your life to do that. You want to clean that up if you get a chance. And if you do that, don't go back to snorting drugs, which many of my friends have done that have had that surgery. It will mess it up again. Big reason why I never did that again, because I like having the ability to breathe. It's pretty vital. You guys should remember to do that. Maybe we'll take a breath real quick. Yes. So eventually I was able to get the last year of my probation taken out. They were like, you did a great job. It was the same judge that put me into jail was the one that took me off of probation. She was gave me a lot of, encouragement. So that felt good. And now I'm no longer on probation 3 years after getting out, however many years later. And still very traumatized, having a lot of issues emotionally, not really sure what I'm going to do. But I was ready to go home to Texas, to my family. So I kind of just wrapped up life here pretty sloppily in Boston and went back home to Austin to live with my brother and get a car, which I've never had a car. And that was not all that fun to go through 10 years of my adult life without a vehicle. So I got a car and worked at a restaurant down there. And but it was weird because I went from having free healthcare to not having free healthcare in Texas. Even though I had this record, I'm paying for healthcare that's pretty much doesn't cover anything, including my mental health counseling. So, it was kind of rough down there for sure during that period. I was feeling like maybe CBD and cannabis. I was hearing a lot about that, maybe thinking that would be helpful to me. To use as medicine for anxiety and things like that. And there was no access to that in Texas either. So, that did lead me to be interested in Colorado, where I moved next, where I heard maybe I could get involved in that industry and I could have access to that medicine. And I did make that move. And Joanne Boyle, my good friend, she was there, and she was telling me about how I could call them up in Colorado, tell them I didn't have a job, and they would get me set up with healthcare. So again, I get set up with Medicaid there, and it was completely free all this time, even up to when I moved. I think I'm still on Medicaid in Colorado. And so, this is one thing I've experienced is access to free healthcare, the way that we talk about it today in politics and things like that. And, and I feel like throughout that time, I really wouldn't have been in good shape if I couldn't go see a doctor or go see a dentist, or definitely not go see a mental health professional, because I didn't have the money. And it has been a blessing to have all that access. So, we're almost here to the end of the story, but we, one of the things I was able to do in Colorado was have suggested to me, to get an EMDR trauma therapist, which, I never had heard of that. To give you a little background on EMDR, it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. It's an interactive psychotherapy technique used to relieve psychological stress, effective treatment for PTSD. During the sessions, you relive traumatic or triggering experiences in brief doses while the therapist directs your eye movements. So, how that would work for me is we wrote down a list of these traumas, obviously getting locked up, getting arrested, being at the top of my list, along with some other things in my life. And, you know, you start with the big one and you pinpoint that. And then every week that you go in there for an hour, you kind of use mindfulness and almost hypnotherapy. You kind of go into this hypnosis, you read your body for the trauma, and then you kind of rate it on like what number, scale of 1 to 10 it's feeling like. And I did that work, and then I was able to just literally just talk out loud for weeks and weeks about the moment of being arrested, the moment of going, this experience of going to jail. You know, it was really difficult for sure. I mean, it's scary. People have a lot of fear around going to therapy, but it made a difference. Like, I was able to work through it and eventually get it down to, on a scale of 1 to 10, like a 1, and feel like, you know, I'm not a piece of shit and I'm not a horrible guy, and like, you know, this doesn't have to affect my whole life, and like, you know, I can kind of start to move on from this thing that went on in my life. And it was a miracle, and it was very, I was feeling, you know, some really awesome energy, and I guess I had redirected a lot of that negativity and that energy out of me. And I had gotten a call from my good friend Sean Packard, and he was like, you should check out this website or this article. And I checked this article out, and it was telling me that there had been a situation in the city of Boston where the woman, her name was Annie Dukin, had been testing the drugs that the Suffolk County had been taking in for years, maybe 10 years, something like that. And she had been falsifying evidence. So she was falsifying this like results and like lying about the results, and maybe maybe working with the police. That sounds like something that would happen. But they had decided to take her in, and over a bunch of years, the like ACLU and different groups like that were pressing her hard with the all these cases that she has signatures on, and just eventually they ended up, they dropped more than 21,000 low-level drug criminal charges involving her, mine being one of them. So I saw a question on there like, you know, have you had it expunged? I had no idea how to get it expunged. I was really concerned about how I wasn't going to be a felon, and it was definitely fucking with my life and making me feel not great to have those charges. And I've been applying for jobs with my degree and like my experience, and I wasn't hearing back from anybody. And, you know, I went down the road of trying to start small businesses and, you know, marketing company, all of that. And, you know, was struggling for sure, like in Colorado, trying to figure out what to do after this experience. And so, yeah, mine was one of the ones that was thrown out. And it was just crazy to like experience that and to feel that and to see that I could drive for Lyft and I could drive for Uber. And there were other things that like I was able to do because I was no longer a felon with these drug charges. So in the end, that is not something that, and maybe that makes this easier for me to do. And maybe that's what I felt like it was a sign that like I needed to talk about this more, and I needed to bring my experience out to teach families and students and kids and young people about the pitfalls and the concerns that they should be facing, and maybe also help people through their substance abuse and their use, and who knows what else. But one thing is for sure, these drug charges are not okay, specifically involving a nonviolent first offense like myself. But, you know, really just for there not to be drug court, for there not to be opportunities for addicts and people in nonviolent situations to clean up their lives and clean up their addictions, is really messed up. And it's just a part of this system that, you know, like so many of our systems, needs to be addressed and looked at, and we need to have leaders that are focusing on it. Because one thing I just noticed in my one little jail with, you know, how many people, not let alone like all of the jails, I think 175,000 Americans housed in 100 federal facilities at this time, is that those are a lot of men and women for sure, and people that have families and have friends and have these connections and children, and like there's just it's just such a strain on so many millions of Americans, I think, and families, and it's a strain that like once it gets started, it never really ends. It affects them and their families for a very long time, and we're always talking about how we can, you know, improve the lives of people, and I think we could start there, and specifically with these drug charges. So now that I got you guys here, I did want to kind of just go over something that has been on my mind, which is to address the lives of incarcerated persons in the U.S. right now during this crisis with COVID. So with so much we are having to deal with in our own lives, it's probably harder than ever to think about the folks locked up or to support them. But at least we can think of them and reach out to the ones that we may know. Letters, calls, and the like are like magic elixirs in there. You know, oftentimes it really does keep people going. And our loved ones that may be incarcerated need that more than ever. So there's something called the prisonpolicyinitiative.org. They put out 5 key policy ideas, which they'd like to see movement on from the prison system, but we're not seeing much of this right now. Social distancing is nearly impossible to achieve in correctional facilities. The air is recycled. Jails and prisons house large numbers of people with chronic diseases, complex medical needs, who are vulnerable to COVID-19. One of the best ways to protect these people is to reduce overcrowding in the correctional facilities. So there are a few things that this group are trying to get different jails to move on. One of which is reducing the cost of phone and video calls. Very expensive. My dad can attest to that. Like my friends, very expensive to pay, have someone pay for a phone call. Not very short or not very long those calls are. I mean, it's just a mess. The whole call thing is its own problem, but they're currently drastically ending visitation for good reason. So they're not letting people visit their family. So with that said, it's like a serious hit to the emotional health of the inmates, and few, if hardly any of these facilities are reducing the cost of the phone calls and the conferences, and that's unacceptable. That right there, I think that would be easy for them to change and to not let this, big corporate entity that pretty much owns all of the phone calls at all of the private prisons and whatnot to just keep making tons of money, instead to kind of help these people out. Because, if I was in jail or if I had friends in jail right now, I'd be really concerned that they would not be able to overcome this illness. And that, I can attest to when people get ill in these places, the system themselves, these facilities do not really have great medical care. They definitely don't care much about somebody being sick. They definitely would rather push you around and make you feel like shit, no matter how sick you are, which is rough. So they're also encouraging them to reduce incarceration and unnecessary face-to-face contact for people on parole and probation. Hopefully that happens where they don't, if they don't have to go in, they can do it over the phone, that kind of thing, which is probably pretty revolutionary, because they're usually like, you either make it here or we send you back to jail. It's just all about fear, and trauma is what happens to somebody in that situation. Reducing jail admissions, LA County's delaying arrests and issuing summons, Baltimore's dismissing pending criminal charges for drug offenses, trespassing, traffic offenses. Probably wouldn't be the worst idea to be taking that into account from now on. Eliminating medical copays, and then releasing people from jails, particularly keeping terminally ill and very old inmates on house arrest. There's also calls for this to be done for nonviolent offenders. I also think about the people who are getting released right now. Maybe they just got released, and it's scary to go back into the world at all. But during this time with like all this craziness and like, maybe you're going to get sick and all of that, I think it's more important than ever that we look to support those people. So yeah, reach out to anyone that that might have been released recently or is going to be released or that's in jail. I mean, just don't forget about them for sure. It's easy to do. You can contact Prison Policy at virusresponse@prisonpolicy.org with ideas as to how we can help them or to learn how you can support those efforts. So yeah, finally, I kind of want to just address the fear and experience that all of us are going through. And that kind of just made a lot of sense for me to do this video, because a lot of what I'm hearing and experiencing and seeing people go through, and that's so new for them, is not all that far off from what I went through in being incarcerated. So, you may be experiencing anxiety around the question of the duration of this change that we're going through. And I didn't know, and this, the crisis or the quarantine, I didn't know how long it was going to really be for me when I went to jail. That, I thought it was going to be 6 months, that would be nice. That's what I was hoping for. That's what my friends and family, oh, we're definitely going to do 6 months. We'll see you back. But, I quickly did find out, and I had to come to grips with that. It couldn't be less than 18 months. And then eventually it turned out to be 20 months. And, and like when we think about what we're going through right now, we don't want to get obsessed with how short this time that we are on quarantine or that we are away from all this normal life. Like, we don't want to get obsessed with how short that time could be because, or when we could return to normal. I think it's important to be mindful of what you can and you should do, and what you can't and you shouldn't do today, and to really come up with some answers for that today, in this moment. And it's okay to be secure and safe and focus on the short term right now, with so much uncertainty around the spread of this virus, and with the uncertainty around when the quarantine will end. It's not easy to do. It's really hard to think about yourself and how can you be secure and stay sustained and be emotionally healthy and mentally healthy and well right now when you're home and you're away from your work and you don't have money, or maybe you're applying for unemployment, you're on furlough, all these things. And we're like hopeful that we're going to be able to be social again in a few weeks. And Trump is super hopeful we're going to be able to, celebrate Easter and eat Easter eggs or whatever the fuck. But, there's a real chance that we're going to have to hold on and be isolated and be separated from our loved ones. And we're going to have to adapt and make do and just be, realize that in this moment and today we can be whole and happy and feel safe and we don't have to think too far ahead. That is a dangerous thing to do right now. No one really knows where the curve's going to go. No one really knows where the economy is going to go and all these things. So yeah, let me just take right before I wrap up here, just want to make sure I didn't miss any other comments. Give me just a second. Jake wants to know who eats Easter eggs. I don't know. The chocolate ones. Let's see. Sorry guys, I'm doing this on my phone here. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. That's fine. If you have any other ones, pop them in here. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to, Trump eats Easter eggs. Agreed. So I just kind of want to leave you guys with some of the things the ideas that kind of got me through that I'd like write at the end of my letters and a mantra and a prayer that used to be something that I turned to. The mantras that I was focused on were, I am loving awareness, is a mantra that I got from Ram Dass, and that we can be love now, and that's that book by Ram Dass is what I read leading up to going to jail, and it was pretty amazing, pretty life-changing, and really just helped me focus on, okay, maybe somebody's pissed off, maybe somebody's screaming at me, maybe somebody's feeling kind of dangerous, or I don't understand them, they don't look like me, they're not understanding me. Well, I'm gonna love them anyways, and I'm gonna figure out how to like support them through their suffering, and I think we can all do that for each other right now. There's a traditional Tibetan Buddhist compassion prayer that a friend of mine sent me, and I turn to this a lot, so I'll read that for you guys. It goes, may all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. And that is from the Diamond Rosary. And yeah, and I was, I would get letters from my friends and my family, and they'd be struggling over there, and I'd be struggling inside while I was locked up, and I wanted to support them through whatever they were going through, and I was there, and so I used to write, be aware, third eye stare, never fear, was kind of my mantra for them, as well as keep it moving and use your head. And that's something we all got to keep doing. So I'm here for you guys. You can reach out to me. Let me know if you have any questions. You could let me know if you have any friends that are going through any of this, that need any help, whether it's struggling with their substance abuse or struggling with some charges that they're facing or how to reintegrate. It feels good for me to do that, to have that service, and to and it kind of, like I said, when my charges got dropped and I had this opportunity to really open up my life and my career and my relationships and just have a fresh start, it felt like I needed to make sure I did not forget to help these people that are in the same position as me and that maybe don't have this amazing miracle to be bestowed upon them. So, yeah, thank you so much. Good luck and stay safe. You know, I don't know what else to say. I think, yeah, just focus on your health, guys, your emotional health, and do some breathing. You know, use this time to kind of just take care of yourself and your relationships, and don't get too caught up in what's going to happen with your career, your life. I mean, we do need money, we do got to eat, but don't let it be this thing where right now when you got to stay home and you got to process all this like scary, crazy information and news and the wild news that maybe your friend just got COVID or whatever it was, because we're going to be hearing a lot more of that our friends and family are going to be having this. That's traumatic, and like we have to be prioritizing our emotional health right now, and then from there, whatever, you know, get that done, then you go do your work from home, then you go figure out where you're going to make money, you know, because you don't want to just go all in on the making money and the working and I'm just going to just, you know, ignore all this trauma that I'm feeling and letting it build up. There's also telemedicine, there's therapy. This would be an amazing time for any of us to connect with the therapist. If we don't have one, we don't even have to get in the car and drive to them. And we don't, you know, whether or not you can pay for it, whether or not there's something there that'll help you pay for it is kind of TBD. Hopefully this new bill and whatever the government does continues to put people in a position to get at least access to mental health care, if not all of our health care. You know, but if not, I'm sure, you know, you could reach out to the right people and find someone to do that pro bono. And my last point will be that maybe we don't have a therapist degree. Maybe we don't have all of the information. We haven't done all the studies on different types of therapy, this and that. But like when I think back to the therapy that changed my life and that helped me out through all this, when I look at like the brass tacks, I sat down in a room with someone else that I trusted, that I felt like could listen and care about me, and I just talked. They just listened. And if we do that for each other, like we will see a vast difference in the emotional health of the people around us. It feels good too, you know, to be able to do that for somebody. So do that for each other, and we will get through this trauma. We will process this trauma while we're going through it. And yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks for letting me do this. And thank you to everybody that was there for me during that time.